The more you listen, the more you hear, right? And this is always true in any situation. With birds, they make a lot of noise, and I think we tend to tune a lot of it out because we're so used to hearing it. But if you really stop and listen for it, it's constantly there. I can just go out on my back porch in the morning with my cup of tea and sit and listen and hear, 10, 15 species easily singing right around me. And getting to know them, the more you get to know them, the more fun it is because you can pick out those individual species and you know who's who and what's where, and then that's your superpower. You don't even have to look and you can know. There's a housefinch in the tree over there. There's a flicker in the tree over there. It's a lot of fun.
Welcome to Story Doc. I'm Adam Taub. In this episode, I spoke to Lauryn Benedict, a professor of biology at the University of Northern Colorado in Greeley, who studies bird communication. What other ways are helpful listening, to songbirds?
Yeah, the more you listen, the better you get at telling species apart and even potentially hearing individuals. And so a lot of what I do is listening to bird sounds and trying to figure out what they're saying. In Colorado, I've done work on canyon wrens and rock wrens, and we've also done work on western meadowlarks and red-winged blackbirds. And it generally involves getting up early, getting out in the field with a microphone and headphones and our recording devices and spending a lot of time tracking individual birds. So you stand out there and you point your microphone at that bird and you hope that it sings. And you wait very patiently and you hope that it sings. And you hope that nothing else sings over it, or the train doesn't go by, or the plane doesn't come overhead. Because what we're really trying to get is really good samples of all of the songs and calls that one species makes. So we will often record a single bird for hours at a time to try and understand its vast repertoire of sounds and songs. There are people who are just incredible at birding by ear. I mean, that's what we call it usually, is birding by ear. And there are people that don't. For me, I'm an ornithologist and I study bird songs, but I'm still not even close to as good as some of these people who are just incredible ear birders who can identify not just the songs of every species, but call notes, even these little chip notes that are really just chip. They can tell what species it is from that. So there are some people that are amazing at it, and it's so impressive when you go on a birding trip with one of those people and they're calling out all the species around you. It's kind of a superpower. There are about 10,000 species of birds, roughly. And among those 10,000 species of birds, there are 3 major lineages that can learn their songs. The rest all have vocalizations that are pretty innate. They're fairly fixed. So something like a duck or an ostrich or a heron is not going to learn their songs. That's all innate. They're pretty much just going to develop their songs. They're born with them. But songbirds and parrots and hummingbirds all can learn their songs. And songbirds are a huge group. That's about half of all bird species, so 5,000 species or so that can learn their songs. So about half of birds learn songs, and depending on the group, they can learn variable amounts. So some songbirds learn one song type, and that's it. Then they sing that for the rest of their life. And they learned it because they, if they were to be raised without any hearing or sensory input, they wouldn't really sing it correctly. So they do learn, but they only learn one type, and they don't learn past about a couple years of age. And then there are other birds like parrots or lyrebirds or other birds that, like mockingbirds, that mimic things, that can learn throughout their life and can learn probably almost unlimited numbers of different things. We can do tests to understand hearing thresholds and things like that for what they hear. And actually humans and birds hear fairly similar frequencies. If we just start with audio frequency, thinking about that, most of what we hear in a bird song, they also hear in a bird song. They might hear a little more than us. What they're better at than us is time discrimination. So although we can hear the frequencies, birds can get a lot more of the subtlety of different time discrimination moments within that. So when we look at a bird song, we often have to slow it down, or listen to it, we often have to slow it down to hear all of the pitch changes that are happening that they can probably hear right away. But we are able to hear the same frequencies. So we are listening in somewhat comparable ways, which is cool to think about. And they definitely listen to each other and respond to each other. There are situations where 2 birds will be counter-singing, where, for example, one sings a song and the other responds. And birds have different song types, so you can think of it as like Happy Birthday versus Row, Row, Row Your Boat, right? You could sing either of those songs. And they vary which they sing back to each other sometimes. And in some species, that carries meaning. So if you sing happy birthday and your neighbor sings happy birthday back to you, that's an indication that they are directing their song towards you, and it might be aggressive, or in other species it might be a sort of recognition of you as their neighbor. So yes, they really do listen to each other and respond appropriately. They do experiments where they record the birds and then they play sounds back to the birds to try and understand how they respond, because just hearing a bird sing, you can get a sense of the sounds it makes, but if we want to know what those sounds mean, we can get a lot more information by looking at how they respond to those sounds. So if there's a sound that we think is aggressive, we might play it to a bird and see if they respond to it aggressively. Or if there's a sound that we think is a mating call, we might play it and see if potential mates come in and approach. And so that's one of the major ways that we understand the function of these songs. A lot of what we're trying to understand is things like, why do different individuals have different sounds? So why do males and females sound different? Why do males and females potentially sing different songs? Or why does this one female over here sound different from this other female over there? Is that difference, is something about their song an indicator of them being able to hold a better territory, or healthier, or produce more chicks? Yes. And they'll have different dialects, just the same way that human language has dialects. So, you know, if you're from the south, you might call it a pecan, and if you're from the north, you might call it pecan, right? Different ways of pronouncing the same word. You have those kinds of dialects in birds where they move into a neighborhood and they start singing the local song. And that seems to be learned when they disperse into that new place, but it can be really local dialects. White-crowned sparrows are famous for this in the San Francisco Bay Area. They've mapped out all the different parts of San Francisco where they sing slightly different dialects from each other, and everybody in the same neighborhood sings the same thing, but if you go 2 miles to, you know, the west, they're singing a different dialect.
Do they communicate between species, between types of birds, or is it, I mean, are they more really tuned in to their own?
They probably communicate more to members of their own species, but they certainly listen to members of other species, especially for things like alarm calls, which might affect them. So the mating systems, or the mating call of another species, is not that interesting to one species because they're not trying to mate with that species, so it's less relevant. But an alarm call is relevant, because if there's another species that says, hey, predator nearby, you might be eaten too. So they absolutely listen in and eavesdrop on other species and communicate in situations like that. Yeah. I do a lot of my listening by looking, interestingly. We often visualize the songs that we record, and we look for differences between individuals or between species by measuring spectrograms, which are visual representations of sound. So there are plenty of times where, for example, when we were studying rock wrens, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how many different song types does that bird sing. Because they'll sing twee, 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 chiroo, 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 choo, 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 right? They have all of these song types that sound a little different, and we wanted to know how many repeatable song types they have. The easiest way to do that is not by listening, but by visualizing it and keeping an image of all those different types. And when we did that, we were able to make these song libraries and categorize all their types, and it turns out that rock wrens have huge song repertoires. Individuals can have up to 120 song types.
Like someone that you would consider like a great listener?
That is a really great question. So here in Colorado, Nathan Peploe wrote a book, which is a guide to the bird sounds of the United States. There's an eastern and a western version, and he has done an incredible job of identifying all the different sounds that birds make and attributing them to different contexts and different individuals and so on. So he's one of those great earbirders that I think is amazing in that way. And then there are all sorts of fun stories too about birds and people. Like there's the story of Mozart's starling. Mozart had a starling, and the starling whistled or sang some of the tunes that Mozart played, and you know, you can debate. I'm not sure we know for sure whether the bird learned it from the musician or the musician copied a few notes of the bird in writing down his pieces. But it's apocryphal, but it's just fun to think about that interplay between nature and humans in what we hear and how we reproduce that. Ooh.
Give the bird example of a great listener.
That is a really interesting question. I mean, Owls are pretty amazing listeners. They hunt often. They hunt at night, obviously, and they have good eyesight, but they do a lot of their hunting by listening for prey. So something like a snowy owl that's hunting in the north and there's snow can actually hear mice and other small animals moving around under the snow, and then they have to dive through the snow to grab it. So that's some pretty incredible listening right there. We think that some of the feather shapes that they have on their faces, kind of like a satellite dish, picking up sounds and funneling sounds to the ears. And some owls actually have ears that are offset, so one is slightly higher than the other, which allows them to perceive not just direction, but height from which a sound is coming. Pretty amazing, right? Because that's why the fact that we are binaural, we have two ears, allows us to tell when sounds are coming from the left versus the right. And if you're trying to figure out where something's coming from, you sometimes tip your head, and that's because you're now putting one ear higher than the other, and then you can locate up and down a little bit, and owls have that naturally. If you want some help, you can now listen electronically as well. There are apps that are really great. There's the Merlin app, which is made by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, that allows you to point your phone at a bird and record that bird, and it will tell you what species it is. So it's sort of like Shazam for birds. We're looking at parrots, which are just an incredible example of learners, right? Parrots, of course, can mimic all sorts of human sounds, and so we've created a public survey where we ask people to report on their parrots. So if anyone has a parrot that speaks, we love data on parrots, companion parrots, and people have filled out a form for us, and on that survey they indicate how many words and phrases their parrots mimic from humans, and then people can also submit recordings of their parrot saying those words. And so today, while Adam is here, I'm going to have him help us with our research by listening to some sounds and writing down what he hears, and this is part of our project.
The first one, it sounded like la la la.
That's fair.
And the second one sounded like come in, come in.
Okay.
But
make your guesses. Yep. Do as many as you want to do, and then.
This is fun. No, I like it.
Okay, good.
I love this.